You see it everywhere now. Men in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, successful, established, everything going for them, and they're walking away from marriage like it's radioactive. Not because they can't find partners, not because they're broken, but because they've done the math. And the math is terrifying. 56% divorce rate. That's the number they throw at you, but that's the polite number, the one that lets everyone sleep at night. The real number, when you count the couples who stay together for the kids, for the mortgage, for the health insurance, for the simple fact that starting over at 50 feels like death. That number hits 70, maybe 75%. 3 out of 4 marriages are either dead or dying. And men are finally waking up to what that means. You want to know why men don't want to get married anymore? Because they're not stupid. They see their friends getting destroyed in family court. They see their fathers working until they die, to pay for families they're not allowed to see. They see the game, and they're choosing not to play. Not because they hate women, not because they can't commit, but because the risk-to-reward ratio is so catastrophically bad that only a fool would sign that contract without thinking twice. Here's the paradox that should terrify you. 86% of divorced people remarry within 5 years. 86%. Think about that. These people just went through emotional hell, financial destruction, watched their children get torn between 2 homes. And what do? They line up to do it again, like abuse victims returning to their abuser, like gamblers who just lost everything running back to the casino with their last paycheck. And they all say the same thing. This time it's different. The most expensive lie in human history. This time it's different. But it's not different. It's the same game with a different player. The same contract with a different signature, the same delusion with a different face. And men are starting to realize that maybe the problem isn't finding the right person. Maybe the problem is the game itself. The psychology behind this is fascinating and disturbing. We're biologically programmed to pair bond. Society conditions us from birth that marriage equals success, that bachelor equals failure. Your mother asks when you're getting married. Your friends post their wedding photos like they've won the Olympics. Every movie ends with a wedding like it's the finish line instead of the starting gun. And so we keep playing, keep losing, keep playing again, like rats hitting the lever for cocaine until they die. But men are starting to break the programming. They're looking at marriage not through the lens of romance, but through the lens of contract law. And when you examine marriage as a contract, when you strip away the flowers and the music and the promises of forever, what you're left with is the worst business deal any man could possibly sign. You're essentially betting half your assets and your future income that your feelings, and more importantly her feelings, will never change. In what other area of life would you make that bet? Let's talk about something that makes everyone uncomfortable: money and relationships. The immediate reaction is to scream about gold diggers, about women who only want resources, about the corruption of pure love by filthy economics. But that's childish thinking. Every relationship is an exchange of value, every single one. And pretending otherwise is how you end up broke and bitter. Look at the obvious example. Older wealthy man with a younger beautiful woman. Everyone points and whispers gold digger like they've discovered some scandal. But what they're missing is the honesty of that exchange. He brings resources, stability, experience. She brings youth, beauty, energy. Both parties know exactly what they're trading. There's more honesty in that arrangement than in most love marriages, where people pretend money doesn't matter while secretly keeping score. The problem isn't the exchange. The problem is the delusion. The problem is when that older man thinks she loves him for his personality, when he thinks his money isn't a factor, when he believes the performance instead of recognizing the transaction. At least prostitution is honest. You know what you're buying and what you're selling. But marriage pretends to be about love while being fundamentally about resources. And that disconnect is where men get destroyed. Because here's what women understand that men don't. Love is both emotional and economic. It always has been. Throughout history, marriage was primarily an economic institution. Love marriages are a modern invention, barely 100 years old. And we're seeing now that maybe our ancestors weren't stupid. Maybe they understood that when you mix feelings with finances, when you pretend economics don't matter in romance, you create a system where someone's getting played. And in modern marriage, that someone is usually the man with resources. Women aren't gold diggers for considering resources. They're rational. They're strategic. They understand that feelings fade, but bills don't. They understand that love doesn't pay for children's education or medical emergencies. They understand what men are only now beginning to grasp. Marriage is an economic contract dressed up as a romantic comedy. And if you sign that contract thinking it's about love, you're the mark in someone else's con game. A prenup, the word that kills romance faster than admitting you have herpes. But let's be clear about what a prenup actually is. It's not planning for divorce, it's acknowledging reality. Marriage is three things simultaneously: spiritual, social, and legal. The spiritual is between you and whatever you believe in. The social is the party and the recognition. But the legal, that's a binding contract with the state. And most people sign it without reading the terms. Do you know what's in that contract you're signing? Neither do most grooms. They're standing there in their rented tuxedo, thinking about honeymoon sex while signing a document that gives the government control over their financial future. The laws governing your marriage can change at any moment. Tax laws, alimony laws, custody laws. The contract you signed in 2010 isn't the same contract you're bound to in 2024. The government can rewrite the rules while you're playing the game. And you agreed to this. You signed up for this. A prenup is simply saying, we'll write our own rules instead of letting the state decide. It's taking control of your own future instead of leaving it to judges and lawyers who don't know you, don't care about you, and definitely don't love you. It's the most adult conversation two people can have, and most people are too childish to have it. The basic model is simple. Yours, mine, and ours. What you bring in stays yours. What I bring in stays mine. What we build together, we share. Clear, clean, fair. But even this simple conversation is too much for most couples. They'd rather sign a blank check to the state than have an uncomfortable conversation about money. They'd rather risk everything than admit that their forever might have an expiration date. People resist prenups like they're being asked to plan their own funeral. It feels like admitting defeat before the game starts. It feels like betting against your own happiness. But that's emotional thinking, not logical thinking. You buy life insurance without planning to die. You wear a seatbelt without planning to crash. You save money without planning to be unemployed. A prenup is just another form of insurance, except this one protects you from something with a 75% failure rate. The resistance comes from the fantasy. The fantasy that your love is different, that your relationship is special, that statistics apply to other people, not to you. It's the same delusion that makes people think they'll win the lottery, or that they're above-average drivers. Everyone thinks they're the exception. Nobody thinks they're the rule. But mathematics doesn't care about your feelings. Probability doesn't respect your love story. Here's what a prenup actually does. It forces you to have the conversations that most couples avoid until it's too late. How will we handle money? What happens if one of us stops working? What if someone inherits wealth? What if someone starts a business? What if, God forbid, we fall out of love? These aren't negative conversations. They're adult conversations. And if you can't have them, you're not ready for marriage. The best marriages are built on radical honesty about uncomfortable truths, about money, about expectations, about what happens when the feelings fade. Because feelings always fade. That chemical cocktail in your brain that makes you stupid with love, it has a shelf life, 18 months to 4 years, depending on the research. After that, you're left with partnership, compatibility, and whatever agreement you've built. And if you haven't built an agreement, if you've just been riding the chemical high, you're about to discover what 60% of married people discover. Love isn't enough. Here's the counterintuitive truth. Prenups don't kill romance, they enhance it. Because real romance isn't about blind trust, it's about conscious choice. When you have a prenup, when you've protected both parties from the worst-case scenario, something magical happens. You stay because you want to, not because you have to. You're not trapped by economics. You're not held hostage by legal complications. You're there by choice every single day. That's more romantic than any fairy tale, knowing someone could leave easily, but chooses to stay. That's real love. Knowing you could leave, but you don't want to. That's actual commitment. Not the forced commitment of being too financially entangled to escape, but the voluntary commitment of two people who wake up every day and choose each other again. A good prenup protects both parties' dignity. It says, if this ends, we'll both walk away whole. It says, I care enough about you to ensure you're protected, even from me. It says, we're entering this as equals, and we'll leave as equals if we must. That's not planning for failure. That's respecting each other enough to ensure that even failure won't destroy either of you. But most people can't see this. They're so caught up in the performance of romance that they can't see the reality of partnership. They're so invested in the wedding that they forget about the marriage. They're so focused on the beginning that they can't plan for the potential end. And so they sign that state contract, that blank check, that agreement to let strangers decide their future, all because having an adult conversation feels less romantic than pretending problems don't exist. Here's what nobody talks about. The men who stay in dead marriages because leaving would mean financial suicide. They're the walking dead, going through the motions, staying for the kids, staying for the house, staying because starting over at 45 with half their assets means they'll never retire. These men aren't counted in divorce statistics, but they're casualties just the same. You see them everywhere once you know what to look for. The guy who works late every night, not because he loves his job, but because going home feels like entering a prison. The man who's developed a drinking problem, not because he's an alcoholic, but because it's the only way he can tolerate his life. The husband who's on antidepressants, not because he's clinically depressed, but because he's trapped in a situation that would make anyone depressed. These men signed up for partnership and got servitude. They signed up for love and got obligation. They signed up for intimacy and got rejection. And they can't leave because leaving would mean losing everything they've worked for. Their children, their home, their retirement, their future. So they stay, dying a little more each day, counting the years until the kids are grown, until they can finally escape without losing everything. And society calls these men successful because they're still married. Society points to them as examples of commitment, of duty, of what real men do. But what society doesn't see is the price these men pay, the dreams they've abandoned, the happiness they've sacrificed, the slow death of their spirit as they realize they're not partners, but prisoners in their own lives. Men are doing the calculation now, and the numbers are brutal. Take your net worth, cut it in half. That's your divorce cost minimum. Now add legal fees. Now add alimony. Now add child support. Now add the therapy, the lost productivity, the emotional devastation of losing your children half the time. Now compare that to the benefits of modern marriage for men. Sex, you can get that without marriage. Companionship, you can get that without marriage. Children, increasingly, you can have those without marriage too. What exactly is marriage offering men that justifies this risk? The answer used to be clear: social acceptance, career advancement, legitimate children, regular sex, domestic support. But every one of these benefits has been deconstructed. Society accepts bachelors now. Career discrimination against single men is illegal. Sex is more available outside marriage than in it for most men. And domestic support. Most modern marriages are dual income, with both parties too exhausted to support anyone. So what's left? What's the value proposition of marriage for men in 2024? Love. You can love without a contract. Commitment. You can commit without government involvement. Partnership. You can partner without legal entanglement. The only thing marriage offers that you can't get elsewhere is the opportunity to lose half your assets and access to your children when it fails. And men are starting to realize that's not a benefit, that's a threat. The response to this is always the same. You're bitter. You're hurt. You've been damaged by a bad relationship. But look at the men walking away from marriage. They're not all divorced. Many have never been married. They're not all bitter. Many are happy, successful, thriving. They're not damaged. They're logical. They've looked at the contract, evaluated the terms, and decided not to sign. That's not emotional damage. That's financial literacy. Women will read this and feel attacked. They'll say it's misogynistic, that it's reducing marriage to economics, that it's destroying romance. But asking men to ignore financial reality in the name of romance is exactly how they end up destroyed. It's like asking someone to invest their life savings without looking at the terms, because true investors have faith. That's not romance. That's exploitation. The comfortable lie is that marriage is about love, and love conquers all. The uncomfortable truth is that marriage is a legal contract with severe financial penalties for failure, and failure is statistically probable. The comfortable lie is that your marriage will be different. The uncomfortable truth is that everyone who got divorced thought the same thing. The comfortable lie is that planning for failure causes failure. The uncomfortable truth is that failing to plan is planning to fail. Men aren't avoiding marriage because they can't love. They're avoiding it because they can love without signing a contract that puts everything they've built at risk. They're not commitment phobic. They're risk aware. They're not Peter Pans refusing to grow up. They're adults who've learned to read contracts before signing them. And what they're reading in the marriage contract is making them walk away. The shame tactics don't work anymore. Calling men boys for not marrying doesn't work when those boys are building empires while married men are getting destroyed in divorce court. Saying they're missing out doesn't work when they see their married friends miserable and trapped. Threatening them with lonely old age doesn't work when they see divorced men dying alone anyway, just broker. The new model emerging isn't about avoiding relationships. It's about avoiding legal entanglement. Men are still dating, still loving, still committing. They're just not signing the contract. They're keeping their assets separate. They're maintaining their own spaces. They're protecting their futures while still building partnerships. And despite what traditional society says, many are thriving. They're having relationships on their terms, partnerships without legal risk, love without financial exposure, even children increasingly without marriage. The system that used to force men into marriage through social pressure is breaking down. And without that pressure, men are asking a simple question. What's in it for me? And they're not finding a good answer. This isn't celebration or condemnation. It's observation. The marriage rate is plummeting. The average age of first marriage is climbing. More men are choosing to stay single permanently. And instead of asking why men are broken, maybe we should ask why the institution of marriage is so broken that rational men are walking away from it. Because here's the brutal truth nobody wants to say out loud. Modern marriage is a bad deal for men with resources. It's a great deal for men with nothing to lose and women with everything to gain. But for successful men, men who've built something, men who have assets to protect, marriage is Russian roulette with half your net worth as the bullet. If you're still going to get married, if you're still going to take that risk, at least do it with your eyes open, have the prenup conversation, not the superficial one where you mention it and then cave when she cries. The real one, the one where you lay out exactly what you're risking and exactly how you'll protect both of you if it fails. Because it might fail. No matter how much you love each other now, it might fail. And if you can't have that conversation, if you can't face that possibility, you're not ready for marriage. You're ready for a wedding, which is a very different thing. You're ready for the performance, not the partnership. You're ready for the fantasy, not the reality. The couples who make it, the ones who beat the odds, they're the ones who can talk about money without fighting, who can plan for contingencies without feeling betrayed, who can protect each other even from themselves. They're the ones who choose each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. And that choice is only real when leaving is actually possible. Marriage can be beautiful. It can be transformative. It can be the greatest partnership of your life. But it can also be your financial and emotional destruction. And pretending that second possibility doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. It just makes you unprepared when it arrives. Men aren't walking away from love. They're walking away from a contract that makes no sense. They're not refusing to commit. They're refusing to put their commitment in the hands of a legal system that profits from their failure. They're not avoiding women. They're avoiding a deal that only makes sense if you ignore the mathematics. Think about who profits from divorce. Lawyers billing hundreds of dollars per hour for fights that could be avoided. Therapists treating the trauma that didn't need to happen. Real estate agents selling homes that families are forced to liquidate. An entire industry built on the destruction of marriages. And you wonder why the system doesn't protect them. The family court system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's designed to extract maximum resources from broken families. It's designed to create conflict where cooperation might exist. It's designed to turn parents into adversaries, fighting over children like property. And men, being typically the higher earners, are the primary targets of this extraction machine. You think the judge cares about your story? You think the lawyer fighting for your wife isn't friends with your lawyer? You think the system wants quick, clean, amicable divorces? The system wants blood. It wants fights. It wants billable hours and court fees and mandatory counseling and custody evaluations. Every complication is profit. Every conflict is revenue. And you signed up to be the product this machine processes. If this makes you angry, ask yourself why. Why does men protecting themselves financially make you angry? Why does rational risk assessment in romance offend you? Why does treating marriage like the contract it is feel like betrayal? Maybe because you've been sold the same fantasy everyone else has, the fantasy that love conquers all, including mathematics, statistics, and contract law. But fantasy doesn't pay alimony. Fantasy doesn't fight custody battles. Fantasy doesn't rebuild after financial destruction. Reality does. And men are finally choosing reality over fantasy, even if it means walking away from an institution that once defined manhood itself. The game has changed. The risks have multiplied. The benefits have evaporated, and men have noticed. They're not broken for noticing. They're rational. They're not wrong for protecting themselves. They're smart. They're not less masculine for refusing to sign. They're more conscious. Marriage is dying not because men won't commit, but because the institution demands too much and offers too little. Until that changes, until the contract makes sense, until the risk matches the reward, men will keep walking away. And maybe that's not a crisis. Maybe that's an evolution. Maybe that's men finally learning that their worth isn't determined by their willingness to sign a bad contract. If this truth resonates, if these words voice what you've been thinking but couldn't articulate, share this with another man who needs to hear it. Like this video if it opened your eyes to risks you hadn't considered. Subscribe for more unfiltered truth about relationships, money, and the contracts that can destroy both. Because someone needs to say what everyone's thinking, but nobody's allowed to speak. And if that someone has to be me, so be it.